They say a house is just bricks and mortar, a collection of wood and glass. They say it holds no memories but the ones we project onto it. They are fools. A house, a true home, is a living thing. It breathes with the laughter of years past. Its walls are saturated with the echoes of whispered secrets and shouted joys, and its foundation is settled on love. My home, my Villa Seaview Crest, was all of that. And like any living thing, it could be murdered. I should know. I watched it happen. My name is Amelia Sterling, and at 72 years of age, I thought I had seen most of what life had to offer. I had buried the love of my life, my husband Richard, a decade ago. We had built Seaview Crest from the ground up on a windswept cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Richard was the engineer, the pragmatist, who made sure the foundation could withstand a hurricane. I was the artist, the one who chose the precise shade of Aegean blue for the shutters, and designed the stained glass window of a ship's compass that threw rainbows across the foyer every morning. We poured 40 years of our marriage into that place. Every floorboard, every rosebush in the garden was a testament to our life together. And I had my son, Mark, my only child. He was the center of my universe after Richard passed. He was a good boy, or so I believed. Ambitious, handsome, with a quick smile that was a carbon copy of his father's. When he brought Chloe home, I was overjoyed. She was beautiful, of course, with doe eyes and a voice as smooth as honey. She clung to Mark's arm, looked at me with what I mistook for reverence, and praised every detail of my home. "Oh, Amelia, this villa is a dream," she'd gush, running a manicured hand over the Italian marble countertop Richard and I had painstakingly chosen. "You and Richard built a real legacy here, a palace." I was flattered. I was a lonely old woman, and her attention felt like sunshine. I saw her as the daughter I never had. When they announced their engagement, I offered to host the wedding in the gardens of Seaview Crest. It was a fairy tale. Chloe looked ethereal, Mark looked smitten, and I looked on from the veranda, my heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. Richard should have been there. The first crack in the facade appeared about a year into their marriage. They were living in a stylish but small city apartment. Mark, a financial portfolio manager, was doing well, but Chloe, who worked in social media influencing, had expensive tastes. They started visiting every weekend, their conversations subtly steering towards the burdens of my big empty house. "It must be so much work for you, Mum, all alone here," Mark would say, his brow furrowed with performative concern. "All these rooms to heat, and the garden. It's a full-time job," Chloe would add, sighing dramatically as she gazed out at my perfectly manicured lawns, tended to by a gardener I'd employed for 20 years. I'd laugh it off. "Nonsense, darlings. This house keeps me young." But they were persistent, like water dripping on a stone. The narrative slowly shifted. It wasn't just about my burden anymore. It was about their opportunity. They had a plan, they said. A brilliant financial strategy. One Sunday afternoon, Mark sat me down in the sunroom, the same room where Richard had proposed to me. Chloe sat beside him, her hand on his knee, her expression a careful blend of supportive wife and concerned daughter-in-law. "Mum," Mark began, his voice serious, "Chloe and I are trying to build our future. We want to invest, to buy property, but the banks, they want to see more substantial assets. Our city apartment just doesn't cut it for the kind of loans we need to secure our dream." I waited, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "The villa," he said, the words hanging in the air. "It's worth a fortune. If you were to transfer the deed to me, just on paper, we could leverage it. We could build an empire, Mum. And you would live here, of course. Nothing would change. You'd be the queen of the castle forever. It would just be a formality, a way to keep our wealth growing within the family. Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with sincerity. Think of it, Amelia. It would be Mark's legacy from his father passed down. It would stay in the Sterling name forever. We could even start a family here, your grandchildren running through these halls. Grandchildren. The magic word. The one weapon they knew I couldn't resist. The thought of little feet pattering on the oak floors Richard had laid. It was a potent dream. I hesitated. But Richard, he left the house to me in a living trust. He wanted me to be secure. And you will be, Mark insisted, his eyes wide and earnest. This makes you more secure. We'll be building wealth for you. It's a smart move. My lawyer and Chloe's have looked it over. It's foolproof. My own lawyer, a wise old friend of Richard's named Arthur Harrison, had always warned me to be careful. Love is a wonderful thing, Amelia, he'd said once, but family and finance are like oil and water. Keep them in separate containers. Blinded by my love for my son and the idyllic future they painted, I ignored Arthur's wisdom. I ignored the tiny, screaming voice in the back of my mind. I agreed. The day I signed the papers was grey and overcast, the sea a churning slate. They took me to a sleek downtown office, not to Arthur's familiar book-lined study. Their lawyer, a man with a smile as slick as his hair, pushed a mountain of documents in front of me. Just sign here, and initial here, Mark said gently, pointing with a gold pen. Chloe refilled my water glass, her hand brushing my shoulder. We're so grateful, Amelia. You're making our dreams come true. I felt a pang of unease, the legalese blurring before my eyes. Shouldn't Arthur look at this? Mum, we've had the best people on it, Mark said, a hint of impatience in his tone. It's all standard transfer of deed stuff. Do you not trust me? The accusation stung. Trust him? He was my son. I had trusted him with my life since the day he was born. I picked up the pen and signed my life's work away. I signed away Richard's legacy. I signed away Seaview Crest. For the first few months, nothing changed, just as they promised. They visited on weekends, brought me groceries, and spoke excitedly about their new investments. I started to relax. I had done the right thing. Then Chloe's parents, Bernard and Linda Miller, came for a 2-week visit. Bernard was a large, gruff man who owned a struggling construction business. Linda was a bird-like woman with a perpetually sour expression. They surveyed my home not as guests, but as conquerors. Bernard tapped the walls, critiquing the plasterwork. Linda ran a finger over the furniture, checking for dust. 2 weeks turned into a month. Then 2. They never left. Their things began to appear. Gaudy porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece, displacing my cherished family photos. A massive leather lazy-boy recliner in front of the bay window, blocking the morning light. The guest rooms became their permanent domain. Their son, Kevin, a lout in his late 20s with no discernible job, soon followed, taking over the pool house and treating my garden like his personal ashtray. I tried to talk to Mark. Darling, the Millers. When are they planning on leaving? He wouldn't meet my eye. Mum, be patient. Bernard's business is going through a rough patch. They just need a place to land on their feet. The invasion escalated. One day I came downstairs to find my beautiful antique dining table, a wedding gift from my parents, covered in Bernard's greasy blueprints. The next, I found Linda had given away my collection of first edition novels to a charity shop because they were dusty. The final soul-crushing blow came when I found them in the master bedroom, my bedroom, Richard's, and mine. Chloe was directing Bernard and Kevin as they moved my bed, my dressing table, my entire life into the small north-facing guest room at the back of the house. "What are you doing?" I gasped, my voice trembling. Chloe turned, a sickly sweet smile on her face. Oh, Amelia, we were just getting this room ready. It's so much bigger, and the sea view is just wasted on one person. Mum and Dad need the space. This is my room, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Well, she said, her smile not wavering. It's our house now, technically. We need to make it work for the whole family. That night, huddled in a small guest bed, the smell of lavender and Richard's cologne replaced by the musty scent of disuse, I wept. The house no longer felt like mine. The joyful echoes were replaced by the miller's booming television and raucous arguments. The rainbows from the compass window were blocked by a cheap plastic film Chloe had installed for privacy. I confronted Mark the next day. I found him on the veranda, staring out at the ocean. I laid it all out. The disrespect, the invasion, the desecration of his father's memory. I begged him to make them leave. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw no trace of the boy I had raised. His face was a cold, hard mask. "Mum, you need to stop this," he said, his voice flat. "Chloe is my wife. Her family is my family now. They needed help, and I provided it. This house was just sitting here empty." "It wasn't empty, I was here!" I cried, my heart shattering. "This is my home!" And then he said the words that have been seared into my soul, the words that echo in my nightmares. He looked right through me, as if I were a ghost already, and said, "Not anymore. It's theirs now. You need to accept that. It's theirs now." The world tilted on its axis. My own son, my flesh and blood, had not just stolen my house. He had stolen my identity, my past, my future. He had erased me. The next week I was formally asked to leave. Chloe explained in that same condescendingly sweet tone that my negativity was creating a toxic environment for her family. Mark stood behind her, silent, his arms crossed. He wouldn't even look at me. They had already packed my bags. They drove me to a sterile, one-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex an hour inland, a place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The first few months were a blur of grief. I was adrift. The silence in that small apartment was deafening. I would stare at the cheap print of a seascape on the wall and feel a physical ache for my real window, my real ocean. I had lost everything. Richard was gone. My son was a stranger. And Seaview Crest was a desecrated tomb. I felt myself withering, fading away just as they wanted. Then, one rainy Tuesday, as I was sorting through the few boxes they had allowed me to take, my fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound journal. It was Richard's. On the first page, in his familiar, steady script, was a quote from an old mariner. "The sea does not reward those who are timid." Something inside me snapped. The grief, the despair. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It hardened into a diamond point of pure, cold rage. Timid? I had been timid. I had been a fool. But I was Amelia Sterling. I was Richard Sterling's wife. And the Millers, Chloe, and the son I no longer recognized had declared war. It was time I started fighting back. My first call was to Arthur Harrison. "Amelia! My God, I've been trying to reach you for months." "Mark's new number for you always went to voicemail," he said, his voice a balm of sanity in my chaotic world. I told him everything. I didn't cry. My voice was low and even as I recounted every detail, from the initial proposal to the final, devastating words. "It's theirs now." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was laced with a fury that mirrored my own. "That boy. That ungrateful whelp. And I'll bet my license they used a cut-rate lawyer to rush you through the signing." He paused. "Amelia, did you read anything you signed?" "No," I admitted, shame washing over me. "I was a fool." "You were a mother," he corrected gently. But Richard was not a fool. He was the most cautious man I ever knew. He loved you, but he knew Mark had a weak streak. Let me pull the trust documents and the property transfer records. Something doesn't smell right here. Don't do anything. Don't speak to them. Just wait for my call. The week I waited for Arthur's call was the longest of my life. But it was a different kind of waiting. It wasn't the passive, hopeless waiting of a victim. It was the coiled, patient waiting of a predator. I was no longer grieving. I was planning. When Arthur called back, there was a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Amelia," he said, "Richard Sterling was a bloody genius." It turned out the transfer of deed I had signed wasn't a simple gift. Richard, in his infinite foresight, had structured his living trust with what Arthur called an ironclad fiduciary duty and succession clause. I hadn't just signed the house over to Mark. I had signed it into a new, secondary trust, the Sterling Family Legacy Trust. The terms were complex, but the essence was simple. Mark was appointed the trustee, not the outright owner. As trustee, he had a legal fiduciary duty to manage the asset, the villa, in the best interest of the primary beneficiary. And the primary beneficiary, until my death, was me. He was allowed to live there. He was allowed to use it as his primary residence. But he was explicitly forbidden from encumbering the property with debt not directly related to its upkeep, and he was required to maintain it in its original condition, short of reasonable wear and tear. Furthermore, the property was for the express use of himself, his spouse, and his direct descendants, not his in-laws, not their layabout son. By moving the Millers in and me out, by allowing them to deface the property, and by effectively abandoning his duty of care to me, the beneficiary, he was in catastrophic breach of the trust. "But the most beautiful part, Amelia," Arthur said, and I could hear him smiling, "is the poison pill Richard included, Clause 12b. In the event of a significant breach of fiduciary duty, the trusteeship is automatically revoked, and a successor trustee, appointed by Richard himself, takes control. Amelia, the successor trustee, is me." I sank into my chair, the phone pressed to my ear. I could almost feel Richard's hand on my shoulder. He had seen this. He had known. He had protected me even from beyond the grave. "So what does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "that the house is not theirs. It was never truly theirs. And now we take it back. But we're not just going to take it back, Amelia. We are going to let them drown in the mess they've made. Karma, I've learned, is not a lightning strike. It's a slow, creeping tide that you don't notice until you're already underwater." Our plan was simple, and it was brutal. First, Arthur advised me to play the part of the defeated old woman. I sent one text message to Mark. "I understand. I hope you are all happy. I will not bother you again." This was crucial. They had to believe they had won, that I was a non-entity, a problem solved. Arrogance would make them sloppy. Second, Arthur hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Peterson. For 2 months, Peterson documented everything. He took photos of Bernard Miller's commercial trucks parked on my prize-winning lawn, leaking oil onto the grass. He recorded noise complaints from the neighbours about late-night parties hosted by Kevin. He got shots of the cheap, ugly vinyl siding Bernard was installing over the beautiful cedar shingles on one side of the house, a clear violation of the "maintain in original condition" clause. The real bombshell came from Peterson's financial deep dive. Mark and Chloe, believing they were sitting on a multi-million-dollar asset, had gone on a rampage. They had remortgaged the house to the absolute hilt. The money wasn't for smart investments, as they'd claimed. It was funneled directly into Bernard Miller's failing construction business, which was now under investigation for using shoddy materials. They had also taken out personal loans using the villa's equity as collateral to buy luxury cars for themselves and a speedboat for Kevin. They were living like kings on the bones of my life, utterly convinced they were untouchable. They had taken Richard's legacy and turned it into a piggy bank for a family of grifters. The third step was the most painful for me, but it was necessary. I had to let them destroy the place a little more. Every photo Peterson sent of a broken fence, of trash piling up, of my rose bushes dying from neglect, was a dagger in my heart. But with each dagger, my resolve hardened. This was not Seaview Crest anymore. This was evidence. This was the rope they were gleefully tying into their own noose. After 3 months, we had an airtight case. A mountain of evidence detailing every breach of the trust. Financial records showing the fraudulent leveraging of the asset. Dated photographs cataloguing the property's decline. Arthur chose a Friday afternoon to strike. The first wave was a series of brutally curt letters. One to Mark, delivered by courier to his office, informing him that he was in breach of his fiduciary duties, that his trusteeship was revoked effective immediately, and that Arthur Harrison was now in full control of the Sterling Family Legacy Trust and its sole asset. It further informed him that a full financial audit had been initiated. The second wave hit the banks. Legal notices were served to every lender who had given them money against my house. The notices informed them that the collateral for their loans, Seaview Crest, had been secured under fraudulent pretenses by a trustee acting outside his authority. The trust was not liable for the debt. The loans were now unsecured, and the full balance was the immediate personal responsibility of Mark Sterling. The third wave was an eviction notice delivered by a process server to the villa itself. It gave the current occupants, identified as Bernard Miller, Linda Miller, Kevin Miller, and Chloe Sterling, 30 days to vacate the premises. I sat in Arthur's office as he made the follow-up calls. I imagine it was like watching a master chess player calmly announce checkmate. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Mark's phone began ringing off the hook. First, his managing director, having received a call from Arthur's office about Mark's mismanagement of a major family trust. Then, the banks, one after another, calling in their loans. The multi-million-dollar debt they had racked up was no longer a comfortable mortgage. It was an anchor, pulling them straight to the bottom. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. Then Chloe started calling. I sat in silence, listening to the frantic buzzing of the phone on the table. The next morning, they were at my apartment door. Not just Mark and Chloe, but Bernard and Linda too. They looked like they had been dragged through a hurricane. Mark's face was pale and slick with sweat. Chloe's eyes were red-rimmed and wild, her usual mask of composure shattered. I opened the door and simply looked at them. "Mum," Mark croaked, his voice cracking. "What did you do?" "The banks. My job. They're calling everything in. We're going to be ruined." Chloe pushed past him, her hands clasped in a desperate plea. "Amelia, please. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. We can fix this. Just call your lawyer. Tell him to stop." "My lawyer?" I asked, my voice as calm and cold as the sea in winter. "Arthur Harrison is no longer just my lawyer. He is the trustee of the Sterling Family Legacy Trust. I have no authority to tell him what to do." Bernard Miller stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You old witch! This is your fault. You set us up." "On the contrary, Bernard," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "you set yourselves up. You saw a beautiful home and treated it like a scrapyard. You saw a lifeline and used it to hang yourselves. Every decision was yours." I then turned my gaze to Mark, my son. The hole in my heart, where my love for him used to be, was just a cold, empty space. You told me the house was theirs, I said, my voice unwavering as I gestured to Chloe and her parents. You stood on the veranda your father built, and you erased me from my own life. You said, "It's theirs now." You were so certain. So why the sudden panic? It seems you are finally getting exactly what you wanted. The consequences of the house being theirs are now also yours. The debt, the fraud, the ruin, it's all theirs. And yours. Chloe began to sob, a theatrical, ugly sound. But we'll be homeless. They're going to take our apartment. They're going to take everything. Yes, I said. I imagine they will. You should have thought of that when you were moving my bed out of my room. I looked at Mark one last time. I saw the terrified boy in him then, the one who used to run to me when he was scared. But he was a stranger to me now, a man who had made his choices. He had chosen them over me. He had chosen greed over love. He had chosen to murder a home. You have 30 days to remove yourselves and your junk from my property, I said, the words tasting like justice. After that, anything left on the premises will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of. And with that, I closed the door on their shocked faces, the click of the lock echoing the final, definitive closing of a chapter in my life. The aftermath was a symphony of karma. Mark was fired from his job for professional misconduct and breach of trust. He and Chloe declared bankruptcy, but because some of the loans were obtained under fraudulent pretenses, not all the debt could be discharged. The luxury cars were repossessed. Bernard's company folded, and he was facing legal charges. The last I heard, the Millers were renting a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the same kind of place they probably came from. Chloe, true to her nature, left Mark as soon as the money was gone. A predator always knows when a carcass has been picked clean. As for Mark, my son, he is broken. He works a menial job, lives in a rented room. He has tried to contact me, sending letters filled with regret and self-pity. I have not opened them. The son I loved died on that veranda, the day he chose a house over his mother. Perhaps one day I will find it in my heart to forgive him. But forgiveness is for my peace, not his absolution. He must live with what he did. It took 6 months and a small fortune to restore Seaview Crest. The vinyl siding was torn off, the cedar underneath painstakingly repaired. The garden was replanted, the oil stains on the lawn dug up and replaced with fresh turf. I hired artisans to repair the scratches on the oak floors and replace the cheap fixtures Chloe had installed. The day I finally moved back in was sunny and bright. I walked into the foyer, and the stained glass compass threw its familiar rainbows across the floor. The house was quiet. It smelled of lemon polish and sea salt. It felt clean. The foul taint of the Millers was gone. The echoes of their shouting had faded, replaced by the gentle sigh of the ocean. I am sitting on my veranda now, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The house is mine. It is whole again. So am I. I lost a son, and for that, there will always be a scar on my soul. But I found myself. I am Amelia Sterling. I am the woman who built this house, the woman who lost it, and the woman who took it back. And the sea, it does not reward the timid. Richard was right about that. He was right about everything.